License costs are skyrocketing. Enterprises and governments are in turmoil. The future is uncertain. Where can we turn for solutions to the VMware crisis? Let's meet the Microsoft solutions we need right now. I'm Michael Richardson, CTO of Dynamic Consultants Group, and your host for this exciting podcast series. I'm very excited and honored to welcome Ben Thomas, Microsoft MVP, and Veeam Vanguard. And now we've really gone global, covering the Americas, Europe, and now New Zealand with expert guests in the series. Ben, what would you like to share about yourself?
Yeah, hey man, thanks for having me on. First of all, I've been enjoying the podcast series so far with a few familiar faces on it. So yeah, like you said, I'm down in New Zealand, bottom of the world. We live in the future, but we try to stay ahead of everyone. So I work for a service provider across Australia and New Zealand called Datacom. I've been there 12 years. I've touched just about every technology there is with having been a service provider, both doing managed services for customers and in our hosting side of the business. So I've designed platforms based on Microsoft, VMware, and a few others just to cover bases. So it's an interesting time at the moment with all those conversations going on around Broadcom and VMware, and kind of seeing it from a few different angles, talking to both our customers who still run their own infrastructure or those who are on our platforms. So it's definitely created the most noise in the industry that it has been in years, and not in a positive light. It's not everyone's excited about something, everyone's kind of scattering, going, holy hell, what do I have to do about this?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's been a big deal. So what specifically would you share about what's going on with VMware and Broadcom? You know, give us your take on it, and why does this matter to organizations?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, I think one of the frustrating things people are finding with what's going on with VMware and Broadcom is all the cycles in time it's now chewing up and allocating. So with now everyone having to go, what's the impact of my licensing? Do I need to make changes to my environment? When does my next renewal come up? How long do I, what do I have to consider? All of these business needs and maybe projects that are already in flow are now paused or waiting because they're going, am I going to have to swap out my entire infrastructure to something else? Am I going to lose the funding I had for this big project because we've now got a massive bill coming through? And I think one of the things that's not really talked about is actually the flow-on effect of all the things in businesses that are now halting or stopping or losing cycles because of people having to consider the impact of Broadcom on their own environment. And like I said, it's not just if they're owning their tin, they're now wondering, I'm working with company X who's hosting my stuff. I know they're using VMware as well. Am I going to see an increase from them? Because businesses can't just absorb everything that comes through. So it's one of those things where it's not just the technical impact or the immediate financial impact. It's the flow onto the business and the problems it's now causing as they can't concentrate on what's actually important to them.
Mm-hmm. Those are great points. I talked recently with Philip about ultimately the business outcomes for your technology stack are what really matters, and that's a great point that you bring out. Like, this isn't just impacting the IT department. This is impacting initiatives well outside of IT teams because of changes in funding, reallocation of priorities and things. So that's really a good point. And you may not even be on VMware, like you may not have your own servers running VMware, and it may still impact you because some of the services that you use are powered by VMware. So that's really interesting. That's a great take. So we're starting to see a lot of interest in moving from VMware to Microsoft solutions. I'm sure you probably are seeing a lot of those same conversations. What do you see as valid destinations to migrate to if organizations are on VMware right now and they're considering a migration? Where do you think is realistic for them to head to next?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. I mean, everyone, if you go on Reddit, you can find threads every day and like ask sysadmin with people going, can I move my business from X to Y? And I think, there are a lot of offerings out there to move to. The surprise for me is people getting really behind some of the smaller open source projects that have been around for a while. Proxmox has a sudden interest that it's never had in the past outside of certain industries and home labs and stuff. And if I was a business looking at that as an option, I'd be seriously looking at the maturity, not just of that platform, and the things that I take for granted today on VMware or other hypervisors, but on the wider reaches of the ecosystem around it. It's running the VM is one part of the equation. Everything else around it is also for consideration. Can you back it up? Can you replicate it? Can you monitor it? And so with those things in mind, putting a Microsoft hat on for a moment and looking at what they've got, the obvious ones that come up first of all are, Azure Stack HCI as a solution. If you kind of, maybe if you've got a taste of VMware Cloud Foundation or you've done VxRail in the past, Azure Stack HCI has a very similar take there, where it's a package solution where they make it easier for you to deploy all of the moving bits, and have some really unique features on top. Or maybe you're coming from existing infrastructure where you need to keep your SAN, and you have hardware that's a little bit older, so you're looking at Windows Server solutions with Hyper-V, and in which case you want to really be looking at the hardware catalog and just making sure that you don't jump straight into, say, Windows Server 2022 on hardware that's 8 years old and isn't actually certified. So taking one step back and going 2019, still perfectly valid for a long while yet, but would allow you to make sure you maintain that hardware support from vendors and drivers. But I think one of the options a lot of people don't think of is what's actually on Azure. And everyone sees Azure and goes, yeah, the reason I'm running it on-prem is because I'm not ready to move to native. All my like we said, all the native backups and monitoring and stuff. It's not really for me yet. I've got existing investments, existing ecosystem I need to maintain. But the Azure VMware solution is in the past been ruled out for being potentially not as affordable, or maybe again being too far away if you're not near a public cloud. But it's a great opportunity from that financial view to still get a guaranteed price for the next 3 or 5 years with some of the offerings they've got at the moment. And it allows you to continue to use your same tooling and your investment in your staff from a training and experience point of view. So it's one that I think people are just skipping past, because it's either they're looking at Azure or they're looking at full replacements like Proxmox and Hyper-V and Azure Stack HCI. But there's a middle ground that people are overlooking at the moment.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know Microsoft's got some campaigns going around this, with pricing. You already called it out, but you can lock in pricing on the Azure VMware solution, which includes the VMware licensing, by the way. So you can lock that in for up to 5 years. And if I think by the time this airs, there'll be just a couple weeks left where you can get 20% off for 5 years on Azure VMware solution, plus up to $120,000 in Azure credit, which is pretty significant, just to help with that move and that migration. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, like you said, you can get on Azure VMware solution with relatively little reskilling, all your existing tools still working, and buy yourself some time to figure out what's the next step, and that won't be for everybody, right? If it's got to be on-prem because of latency or performance or data residency, whatever the reason is, then maybe it won't be a fit for you. But now's a really good time to be looking at Azure VMware solution. I think it's really a good take. But yeah, the rest of the stack that you mentioned too, all great solutions. So okay, if you're talking to an organization, they're going, okay, we've decided, yeah, we're going to move to Hyper-V or Azure Stack HCI. How do they get there? Like, what high level? What are some valid methods, tools, processes to go from VMware to Azure Stack HCI or Hyper-V?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, moving platforms has never been an easy exercise for customers in the past. I've certainly moved plenty from physical to virtual, Hyper-V to VMware, VMware to Hyper-V in the past. And so there's a lot of tooling out there now these days for it. Obviously, the best starting point, if you can afford to, maybe if you've invested in infrastructure as code in the past and your apps are a bit more contained, that ideal scenario that I'm yet to come across a customer who's actually managed to do it. But the best starting point would be to look at, can you build net new VMs on that new platform and move the applications and the data across instead. Then you're getting all of the goodness from day one. You don't have like legacy hanging on, VMware tools hanging around, weird drivers, old unknown lost hardware, that kind of stuff. That's obviously the best starting point. It's the most effort as well. And as we've already discussed, you already got competing priorities. You weren't planning on a hypervisor migration at this point in time. So, you might be time poor or financially poor that you can't afford to invest in that approach. So then you move on to the next most easy step, which is, well, how do I move just the VMs across? What options do I have there? And it's actually quite a few options and ways to approach that. So if you're going into the Windows Server world with Hyper-V, and you've gone with System Center Virtual Machine Manager, they've actually got native inbox tooling. So you can connect System Center Virtual Machine Manager into your vCenter, and then it can do the migration of VMs over for you. So that can be a great way to save on cost, because once you've got your Virtual Machine Manager license, that includes that migration capability. You're not having to buy another tool on top of that to do the migration. There's a preview service from Azure Migrate that I think is coming out shortly. They talked about it in a recent blog article on the back of Build, that Microsoft's looking at Azure Migrate tooling to get from VMware to Azure Stack HCI. So there'll be, that familiar experience of being able to go and look at your machines with Azure Migrate and move them across.
Yeah, because today you can already do that to Azure from VMware, but that's now you're going on-prem to cloud, but it's in preview and coming soon, trademark coming soon, to go on-prem VMware to on-prem Azure Stack HCI. That's really neat.
Yeah, and I guess that's the advantage of the common control planes and stuff coming through with Azure Stack HCI, is the technologies they already have investments in for working with Azure and now start to become more readily available on-prem as well. And then you've got your traditional backup vendors as well, who most of them today have the ability to do hypervisor independent restores. I'm obviously most familiar with Veeam, so they have had for a long time the ability to instant boot backups from any platform onto Hyper-V. So you can set up your jobs, have them backing up very regularly, do a final backup, shut down on VMware, instant recover it onto Hyper-V, and then it's just a live migrate off the backup storage onto your production storage, and your VM's up and done. It's a really nice approach because you're not actually losing the source VM. It's coming from backups. So if you're doing testing anyway, you can confirm, hey, my backups are all good. And that's again a low cost way if you've already got a backup product, paying for that licensing. It's a lot easier. Commvault as well, I know, has the ability to do continuous restores, so they can actually do continuous backups and restores across hypervisors. It's another option out there. And then you can move into ingest. So Carbonite Move is a product I've used in the past, previously called DoubleTake. And so you can install agents in a source and a destination VM, and it will basically clone live that machine from one to the other. And once they're all in sync, same thing, you can cut it over. It shuts down the source VM, it reboots the destination, and hey presto, your machine's across. So there's quite a few, they're all got a common theme of, you need to kind of understand your app, you've got to have someone to test it, you've got to get your waves together of what machines do I need to move together. And then it just comes down to, what kind of outage can you have? What kind of budget do you have for additional software to do it? And what time frame do you need to have it done in? So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds simple, and at one level it is simple conceptually. There's just a lot of moving pieces, right?
Mm-hmm.
With apps, and what apps are talking to what storage, or talking to what other services. So it's something you plan out, but the actual doing of it, the tools handle most of the scenarios pretty well. So that's good. All right. So, one of the common fears that we've heard about this, I want to move to, or I'm considering Hyper-V or Azure Stack HCI, whether it's really enterprise ready. There's, I think, a little bit of VMware. I'll say it say it nicely, a little bit of VMware snobbery. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's just the reality. You know, it's kind of like Cisco. You know, nobody gets fired for buying Cisco. Nobody gets fired for buying VMware. Um, is Azure Stack HCI or Hyper-V, are they really ready for the enterprise? Are they ready to support critical workloads at scale with all the tooling? You know, like, yeah, what would you say to that?
I mean, I always laugh at the term enterprise ready, because it's one of those scale things where depending on what country you are and what field you're in, enterprise is very different. I mean, in New Zealand, we're obviously a lot smaller with our customers, but I have customers who still consider themselves enterprise, and they are enterprise in every way other than the size. And then you can go across to Australia or you go across to the States, and our enterprise is small business.
Uh-huh.
So it's one of these funny things. Yeah, enterprise really is more how they see themselves than the actual technology. But in saying that, you know, Hyper-V is not a new kid on the block. It's been around in its current iteration since 2008, and I know some people would have tried it in 2008 and had a pretty poor experience back then. But to be fair, at the same time, using VMware in 2008 wasn't as smooth of an experience as it is today with version 7 and version 8. So in that regard, I mean, everyone's aware Hyper-V is running Azure. And you'd be hard to challenge me that Azure isn't a large enterprise, considering how many VMs and how globally, you know, large it is. But I mean, on a more personal note, I mean, I've built and run successfully a Hyper-V based hosting platform, and I wouldn't be hosting machines for other customers on a platform that I didn't think could run critical systems. You know, it's bad business sense to to build a platform that you don't trust to stay up and run critical workloads for other customers. You know, it just, I wouldn't do it. So, I mean, on a personal note, yeah, it's enterprise ready. You know, it does everything you need. It's got failover clustering. You know, machines will come back up in seconds of a host going down if that's the behavior you want. You know, it's got load balancing between hosts, whether you use SCVMM and the more advanced load balancing there, or even basic failover clustering load balancing will evaluate those workloads and make sure they're moving around. All the hardware vendors support Hyper-V, so it doesn't matter what flavor you pick, you can find your vendor supporting it. If you're a storage vendor, again, everyone's got a guide on how to get it up and running with Hyper-V. There's no special sauce. And yeah, it's the larger ecosystem as well. Again, we talk about Proxmox a lot in the community at the moment as a flavor that's interesting. If I'm an enterprise, I've got some pretty critical workflows that I have, and it might be ITSM integration so that the right support team gets a ticket when something breaks. That relies on the monitoring having integration into ITSM. Then I've got a specific monitoring tool that integrates into my service tool. So that monitoring tool has to be able to support where the VMs are running. And find a decent monitoring tool that doesn't support Hyper-V if it already supports VMware. So there's you know, that enterprise piece is not just can I run the VMs, it's that whole picture around it. And the enterprise landscape for all those other tools, I mean, there's always Hyper-V on that tick box. So,
Yep. No, that's all great points. I mean, uh, can it run mission critical workloads? Absolutely. And but it goes way beyond that, like you said. You know, can it integrate with the rest of the ecosystem? Can you do backup and recovery? Can you do monitoring? Can you do integrations with other critical systems? And absolutely. And you know, that's not nearly as true for a lot of other platforms. I think you know, Microsoft solutions really stand out in that regard, and the community, right? Just the you know, you're a big part of that, right? The community around Hyper-V and Azure Stack HCI is really mature, and if you have an issue, somebody else has probably seen that issue already, or
yeah.
if you need guidance, you know, somebody else has thought through that scenario before, and there's help out there to be had. So that's also really important. Um, you know, one other thing I want to go back, because we talked a little bit about cost and the cost of migration and the cost of you know, putting other ventures on hold because of you know, potentially large licensing increases. Um, let's talk for a second about okay, so I'm going to put myself in an organization's shoes. You know, I've got a big investment in VMware. My renewal's coming up. Um, now I'm thinking, okay, uh, I either absorb this huge cost of licensing increase, or I look at another platform like Hyper-V. I'm probably running Windows VMs already, so I was probably already licensed for Windows Data Center. Um, how do you see that affecting the, you know, now we've got this migration project, but is there any cost savings that may save the day here?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny when we talk about enterprise. You're right. Everyone's got an enterprise agreement. Everyone's got data center licensing already because they've got that density of workloads that it just makes
Mm-hmm,
sense. So yeah, you might have to find the bodies and resources for a massive project to move onto a new platform, but the payback period for that platform might be way shorter than you expect when you take into account that you're not just reducing your licensing cost, you're actually removing an entire element from it today.
mm-hmm,
You know, you've already got your Windows Server licensing that you've been paying for forever to run those VMs, and you've got this VMware. I mean, I don't want to say VMware tax, but that, you know, you've got this VMware element that you've had for forever, and it's been worth it. You know, the reason they've been the major player in the virtualization space is they have a very mature, very solid, very polished experience. You don't get there by mistake, but it has always been an extra cost. And now
mm-hmm.
you can essentially look at reducing or completely removing it. You know, you might start at a phased approach of you're testing the water, you're taking those less critical machines, and you'll start by moving them to a Hyper-V based platform or EdgeStack HCI. And so you can start pulling back those license counts to get it more in hand. And maybe you want to do a 1 year purchase this year round. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so you'll start to see that drop off of that VMware licensing as you move more and more platforms off. And it might make sense long term actually to free up that money for those projects you're putting on hold. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm not going to say it would be cost neutral, but it definitely, you know, when you're doing that look at what's it going to cost to my business to move, it's not
Mm-hmm.
just that initial project cost, and it's what am I going to save by moving, you know?
Yep.
Is
Yep.
it worth all the retraining, you know? Because we don't touch on, you know, the people skills. People, you know, the engineers we all employ to work on VMware are very specialized normally, and you can't just pick an engineer up and go, right, today you're Hyper-V, good luck. Um,
Yep.
and that's not because it doesn't have the right features or it doesn't have, you know, the stability or anything like that. It's no different to saying, all right, Mr. Windows guy, you're now working on Linux exclusively.
Yep.
It's just it's a familiarity thing, right? People can't just switch their brain off and magically know where to find the right button or the right PowerShell command or the right, you know, API to call. So you've got to plan for that training of your staff as well if you're going to be moving them across from VMware to Hyper-V. And
Yep.
again, that training budget can now potentially be expanded if you're reducing your licensing costs by removing that VMware element.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. And you know, just to put an exclamation mark on that, it's not that you're stopping paying for VMware and now starting to pay for Hyper-V. You've already paid for Hyper, like you already own it. And so you're able to totally cut that additional cost out. And and you don't have to say VMware tax, but I'll say it. You know, you can stop paying the VMware tax, and now you do have more money to help pay for the project, to help pay for the training, those kinds of things. And long term, you may find that you've reduced your costs significantly. Like you said, now we can focus on some other initiatives because we've got budget
Yeah,
back to do that.
it's and you know, one of the ones that comes up frequently when people talk about Hyper-V and the cost of Hyper-V is I mean, obviously 2019 they stopped releasing new exclusive versions of Hyper-V Server. And
Right.
this was the free SKU that kind of played alongside ESXi free.
Mhm.
But it was a cut down version of Windows with everything else removed. And some people have carried on that messaging, that, you know, that FUD that's been there around, well, Hyper-V got cancelled. Like there was no 2022 version of Hyper-V. It's gone. There's no free version, and it's like, well, Hyper-V's not gone. It's in Windows Server. In fact, all, you know, that you've now got more resources in Microsoft focusing on the Windows Server Edition because they're not having to cut a separate version and maintain a separate version of just Hyper-V. And if you don't turn on other features, which straight up don't turn other features on your Hyper-V server on, just because Windows has got those roles there, nothing runs on your Hyper-V server other than that. The 2025 is coming out, imminently. You can see the release just come out in the last few weeks around the previews really ramping up. All of those good investments that Azure Stack HCI's had for the last 3 years are now coming back into Windows Server, and in the nick of time. If you're starting to get into large language models and machine learning and all that hotness at the moment, 2025, like Azure Stack HCI, will have GPU partitioning. So you can now, that hard to come by GPU can now be split a few more ways. But Hyper-V server, yeah, it's gone. But if you were only running Linux machines, yeah, I mean, did you really? You're more likely to probably go for something like KVM now or Proxmox because you don't want Microsoft on anything, so there's no point paying it. Yeah, there would be a tax. But if you're only running Linux, you can actually just buy standard edition Windows Server licenses for your host. If that's the way you want to do, you want to buy a perpetual license, you buy some standard editions for your Hyper-V host. That's it. Job done. Run as many Linux VMs as you want. There's no restriction there. Or you can go down the HCI path. You pay $10 a core US and run as many VMs Linux on there as you want. It's an interesting one. So yeah, the licensing cost and the availability of Hyper-V is often one of those FUDs that comes out from the competitors.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And the Linux license scenario is a really interesting one we haven't talked much about, but that's all I think probably really helpful for our listeners to consider too. But the only downside of going Hyper-V with standard is you don't get some of the nicer storage spaces direct and some of the hyper converged features. But if you're going to do SANs and Hyper-V, then absolutely support it, and you don't need anything more than Hyper-V, Windows Server standard with Hyper-V. So that's good. Besides, we didn't talk much about anything other than hypervisor as far as the Hyper-V and Azure Stack HCI platform. Anything that you would share, I guess, about Microsoft's storage platform, which I think is really a rock star as far as things that people should be looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people have shied away from vSAN in the VMware world. It's in recent versions started to get a bit more attention with their redesigned architecture, the Express storage architecture. And one of the things I found quite amusing about that architecture is if you look at it on an architecture page and put it beside Storage Spaces Direct, the new vSAN architecture looks very close to Storage Spaces Direct. They've no longer got their disk groups. They've just got a giant pool of disks. It's like, hang on, there's some synonymous stuff going on here that looks exactly the same. So Storage Spaces Direct, I mean, we've been a user of it since 2015. We were a launch partner with Microsoft. I was speaking at Ignite when it went live about Storage Spaces Direct. And it's had a few bumps along the road, but find me a vSAN customer that hasn't also had some bumps, or a Nutanix customer who hasn't had some bumps. But these days, it's got all the features you would expect from a storage vendor. You want to do native storage replication between 2 sites, 2 clusters, 2 machines. You've got storage replica. You want to do all flash? Yeah, sweet as. There's a bunch of improvements you've been seeing Microsoft talk about at their conferences around native NVMe support getting better. They're quoting 40, 60, 70% improvements in NVMe speed with the latest versions of HCI and Windows Server. You maybe you are a bargain basement or you're a small site. I'm still running hybrid arrays as well. So spinning disk with a cache, S2D will outperform any other hybrid storage you've got if you still need to meet that price performance ratio. It's crazy how good the caching algorithms in S2D work for making sure that as long as you size that cache to fit most of your workload, it will all day, every day meet that performance and feel like all flash, even though it's got
Mm.
spinning disk. You look at the way it does rebuilds, and it's incredible. So example, we've run 8 node clusters. Each cluster has 12 disks in it. If you have a disk failure, if you've got the spare capacity, that disk just gets rebuilt into that spare capacity immediately. So your risk from disk failure is almost non-existent, because within minutes, potentially, the missing blocks are rebuilt. And then when you replace the
Mm.
disk, there's no impact, because all it's doing is copying an extra copy onto the disk before it removes it out to balance that load again. So S2D is a fully fledged storage solution that it comes with data center, Windows Server, and with Azure Stack HCI. So if you are doing a hardware refresh, or you're not doing SANs today, it's 100% worth having a serious look at from that point of view.
Absolutely. And I think this is one area where Microsoft has really pushed ahead of VMware as far as innovation. And this will be one of the last things we'll have time to talk about here. But another piece of this whole Broadcom VMware story that just makes me nervous for the future for organizations is, what is the innovation going to look like under Broadcom? It just, I don't know. I don't know what the future, the roadmap's going to look like. Where's the product innovation coming from? But Microsoft has a very proven track record of driving innovation on these platforms. So it's a platform to be excited about. Well, let me ask just this final question. Any final advice you'd give to organizations wrestling with what to do, and as they're dealing with these changes with VMware?
Yeah, look, I mean, the big piece is don't rule out Microsoft. A lot of people have been burnt in the past, but 2008 was a long time ago. Have a serious look at it, and if you want to get people's experience, come join our Slack group. I'm sure you can put a link to it in the description somewhere. But
Yeah.
so we've run a Slack group for 7, 8 years probably now. And you find all sorts of enterprises and small businesses and service providers talking about Hyper-V, storage spaces direct, Azure Stack HCI, Azure services, anything and everything goes. And you can get lots of real world experience on how it's working, what problems are people hitting. So there's a really thriving community to actually find out what's real, and to cut through some of that FUD.
Yeah, that's great. I'll totally share the link to that Slack channel. That's been great for us to be a part of, and the community is really strong there. I guess just to wrap up, thank you so much, Ben, for coming. This has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks to our viewers and listeners. Come back for the next episode. You can find more content also at richardsoncloud.com. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.